spring of 1884, Ash Ridge, in the New Mexico Territory, baked under a dry wind. Dust moved down the main street between crooked buildings. The market square was busy with horses, wagons, and rough talk. Today, there was something different in the center of it all. A young woman in a faded blue dress stood on display, hands clenched at her sides. Her name was Kate Wynn. She was 22. The sun burned her skin. Shame burned deeper. Her father shoved her forward so everyone could see. His voice sounded like it did when he sold a broken plow. He said that she could cook, sew, scrub, and keep quiet, and that any man with enough coin could take her home before nightfall. Then he told them why he could not keep her. He said that she was barren, that her husband had sent her away after 2 empty years, and that there was no child in her belly, and likely never would be. Men shifted on their heels. The quiet between the murmurs felt heavier than any laughter. Kate did not beg. She had begged once already, the day her husband threw her out with her wedding dress torn. She had knelt in the dirt then. It had not changed a thing. She would not kneel now. Her mother stood near a wagon with a frayed shawl around her shoulders. She did not look at Kate or raise her voice. When the murmurs died down and the men stopped calling out prices, the mother simply turned and slipped away with the others. When most of the buyers had lost interest, a stranger stepped out from the shade by the blacksmith. He was broad to the shoulders, his shirt stiff with dust, his coat smelling faintly of horse and pine. A wide-brim hat hid most of his face. He did not circle Kate or ask her to smile. He walked straight to the table, reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch, and spilled coins in front of her father. Her father blinked and asked if he was sure because there were no refunds on a barren girl. The stranger said in a low, even tone that she would not be judged anymore. Then he turned and walked away from the square without looking back. The sale was done. Her father gave Kate one last shove between the shoulders and said that she belonged to that man now. Kate bent to pick up the small satchel that held everything she owned. One extra pair of shoes and a locket with her mother's young face inside. Then she followed the stranger into the dust. A wagon waited near the blacksmith, hitched to 2 tired mules. The stranger climbed up and took the reins. Kate pulled herself onto the seat beside him, feeling the rough boards under her and the weight of eyes behind her. She did not yet know his name was Beau Thatcher. He handed her a dented canteen and told her that it was a long ride. The water tasted like tin, but it cooled the dry ache in her throat. They rolled out of Ash Ridge and into open land. Behind them the town's noise faded until there was only the rattle of the wagon and the soft grunt of the mules. Beau kept his eyes on the road. For a long time he did not speak. Now and then, the brim of his hat lifted just enough for Kate to see the tired skin around his eyes and the scar across one knuckle. His hands rested easy on the res. At last, in a quiet voice, she asked why he had taken her. She did not expect much. He said that he had 5 children and no mother for them anymore. He added that he had no time to be cruel. Her throat tightened as she asked if she was meant to be a governess. He shook his head once and said that he only needed someone who was not cruel and that this was enough. If this story is touching your heart already, let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and if you have ever gone through something similar. Also, tell me what you would like me to improve in future stories. By dusk, they reached his land, a ranch tucked against low hills. The house leaned a little to one side. A gray barn stood behind it. Chickens scratched in the yard and scattered as the wagon rolled in. Bee stepped down, tied off the reins, and walked toward the porch without looking back. Kate climbed down and followed. The front door was only a thick quilt nailed over the frame. Inside, 5 faces turned toward her at once. 4 boys and 1 girl watched from near the hearth. Their cheeks were red and their clothes worn, but their eyes were older than they should have been. Fever had taken their mother 2 winters ago, and the quiet it left behind still hung in the air. Bee said that this was Kate and that she would be staying. The youngest, a boy about 5, walked straight to him and wrapped his arms around his leg, never glancing her way. Bo lifted him with one arm and pushed open a narrow door with the other. He told Kate that there was a room upstairs and that the wash water in the bucket was still warm. She climbed the steep steps, one hand on the rough wall. The small room held a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a single window looking out over a thin line of fence and dry grass. She sat down her satchel and sat on the edge of the mattress. For a while she only listened. Boards creaked. A chair scraped. A child coughed below. She lay down without undressing, her dress still smelling of dust and fear. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She had been sold as Barren and bought by a stranger with 5 children. She did not know it yet, but this tired house and these watchful little faces were already pulling her toward a life that would not be ruled by that word anymore. Morning on Bo Thatcher's ranch came before the sun. Boots hit the floorboards. A chair scraped and thin coffee steamed over the fire. Kate washed in cold water, tied her hair back with shaking fingers, and went downstairs. 5 children stared at her. Judah, the oldest, stood with his arms folded, chin lifted like a man. Levi and Gideon whispered by the table and shot her quick-side looks. Mira sat near the fire, clutching a scrap of cloth. Samson, the youngest, hovered by the doorway, thumb in his mouth, and eyes too big for his face. Bose stood by the back door with his hat on and his sleeves rolled. He said that there were fences to check and animals to see to, and that she should make herself at home as best she could. Then he stepped outside into the white dust and closed the door. She turned to the stove because there was nothing else to do. The coffee pot burned her fingers and banged against the iron. Dark liquid splashed over the burner and the floor. The smell of scorched grounds filled the room. No one laughed. No one helped. The children just watched. Her cheeks burned, but she wiped up the spill and tried again. The beans boiled to paste. The little loaf she shaped stayed low and heavy. When she took up a sock to mend, the needle slipped and jabbed her finger, then rolled under the stove where she could not reach it. She kept her head down. She swept and wiped and stacked wood in neat rows that nobody mentioned. Her hands throbbed. The quiet pressed on her like a weight. By afternoon, she lifted a pot of stew from the stove. Grease had slicked the handle. Her grip slipped. The heavy pot crashed to the floor. Stew splattered across the boards and her skirt with a wet smack. Kate froze, her heart hammered. Old memories rose up in her chest. A man's voice turning sharp. A fist, the sting of blame for wasting food she had tried her best to make. The front door opened. B stepped in, dust on his boots, sun on his shoulders. He took in the pot on its side, the stew on the floor, the children standing stiff as fence posts, and Kate in the center shaking. He did not raise his voice. He bent, picked up the pot, scraped what little stew remained into it, and set it aside. Then he took a rag, knelt, and wiped the floor in slow, steady strokes, as if he were cleaning up spilled water. He said that it was only stew. Then he carried the rag outside and went back to work. Kate stood where she was, the damp cloth in her hands. There was nowhere for all that fear inside her to land. It folded into something small and deep instead. Something she did not yet have a name for. That night, after a thin supper and a sink full of scrubbed gin plates, the house grew quiet. The boys crawled into their beds. Samson curled into a ball under his blanket. Mira lay near the fire, scrap of cloth pressed to her cheek. Kate stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked under her feet. Cool air brushed her hot face. Above the roof, the sky was black and crowded with hard, bright stars. She sat on the top step, folded her hands in her lap, and tried not to cry. She failed. Tears slid over her cheeks into her palms. No one saw. When they slowed, she wiped her face on her sleeve, drew a long breath, and went back inside. Later, when the cabin had settled into real quiet, she moved from bed to bed. She checked blankets, brushed hair back from small foreheads, listened to the uneven breaths of children who did not yet trust her. Mira's skin burned under her hand. The heat was raw. Fear shot through her sharper than before. She stepped into the hallway just as Bo opened his door, his face tight with the same worry. In a low voice, she said that Mira was burning and that she needed willow bark and any mint they had. He did not question her. He just nodded and moved. Soon a kettle rattled on the stove, and herbs lay on the table. Kate boiled water, crushed bark and leaves, and soaked clean rags in the bitter brew. She laid the cloths over Mira's brow and chest, then gathered the girl into her lap. She rocked her and hummed broken bits of old songs her own mother had once sung. The fever climbed through the night. The little girl shivered and whimpered. Hours dragged by. Kate's back throbbed and her arms shook, but she did not let go. Each time the cloth cooled, she changed it. Each time Mira moaned, she whispered that she was there and would not leave. Just before dawn, when gray light began to creep through the window, Mira's eyes fluttered open. Her voice came out in small as she asked for pancakes. Kate let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her all night. B stood in the doorway with his hands clenched at his sides. At that single word, his shoulders dropped. His gaze found Kate and stayed there as if he were seeing her for the first time, not as a purchase, but as the woman who had kept his child alive. Kate was too tired to smile, but she did not look away. The next morning when she came downstairs, the stove was already warm. A kettle steamed. Beside it sat a dented tin mug and a folded scrap of paper. She opened the paper. 2 stiff words were scratched across it. Thank you. There was no name, but she knew. She folded the note and slipped it into her dress pocket like something precious. The tea tasted sharp and wild with a hint of pine, and it warmed her chest all the way down. Days slid into weeks. Spring settled over the ranch. Kate's hands grew sure. Bread rose high and brown. Beans softened the way they should. She found old cloth in a trunk and cut and stitched it into rough scarves, one for each child. They tied them on without question. In the evening, she lit a small candle and helped the boys trace letters on scrapwood. Gideon learned to shape his name. Levi counted nails from a tin. Mira sat by the fire while Kate braided her hair into 2 neat ropes and tied them with a bit of blue ribbon she had saved. Samson followed her from room to room, copying her every move. She learned their fears. Judah went stiff when thunder rolled. Levi lied when he was ashamed and then hid. Mira grew quiet when she missed her mother. Samson climbed into any warm lap when the wind screamed round the corners of the house. They never asked who she had been before. They watched what she did now. One night at supper, Levi handed her a spoon and said that Mama would want more salt. Silence dropped over the table. His eyes went wide. Judah and Gideon both looked at her, braced for her to correct him. Kate did not flinch. She added a pinch of salt, stirred the pod, and said that he was probably right. The next day, Gideon said it. Then Mira Samson, who had already wrapped his whole small heart around her, said it every chance he got. Mama. There was no ceremony. The name just settled on her shoulders a little more each day, until it felt less like a mistake and more like a home she had never expected to find. One late afternoon, when the sky over the fields turned the color of old copper, Bo sat on the porch steps with a block of wood and a knife, carving slow curls that fell at his boots. Kate stepped outside with a basket of folded shirts. He asked if she had ever thought of leaving. She said that once a while back she had. He nodded. He said that when he dropped those coins on the table in Ash Ridge, he had meant to give her a way out, not a cage, and that if she ever wanted to go, he would not stop her, because they had started with a sale, not a choice. Kate looked out at the short garden rows she had planted, dark and neat against the dusty yard. The swing she had tied to the old oak form moved gently in the wind. She said that she had once believed love meant being chosen at first sight when dresses were white and promises were easy. Then she said that now she knew something better, being chosen again after someone had seen who you really were. B's knife went still in his hand. She set the basket down and took his scarred fingers in both of hers. She said that if he was not sending her away, then she was not going. Weeks passed. Inside the house, Kate felt more steady than she had in years. One bright morning, Bo hitched the wagon. He said he needed salt and nails from Dust Bend and that she could ride along if she wanted. She climbed up beside him. At the general store, Bo went inside with his list. Kate stayed on the porch. She folded her arms and tried to ignore the way the boards under her boots felt like the past. A sharp, familiar voice called out. Look what wandered back. Her former mother-in-law stood at a stall of flower fan flicking. A younger woman with neat gloves clung to her arm. That her? The young wife asked loud enough for others to hear. That's her, the older woman said. Pretty but useless. Couldn't give us a single child. The young wife placed a hand on her own flat belly and said she would soon give her husband a strong son. Kate's jaw clenched. Old shame rushed up. She turned toward the wagon. There was nothing she could say that would change their minds. A shadow fell beside her. B stepped out of the store with a sack in his arm. He took in the scene with one look. He said that the woman beside him was the one who sat up all night when his girl burned with fever. The one who kept 5 children fed when the land fought them. The one who made his house feel like a home. He said his children slept easier because she was there. He did not use her past to name her. He used what she did now. Then he looked only at her and asked if she was ready to go home. Her throat was tight. She nodded. That night, after the children were in bed, Kate stepped onto the porch with her shawl wrapped close. Stars burned over the dark fields. Bo joined her, leaning on the rail. She said quietly that he had not needed to speak for her in town. He kept his eyes on the hills and said that he had not spoken for them. He had spoken because it was true. A few nights later, heat pressed down even after sunset. The windmill creaked in the dark. Kate took a bucket and walked toward the well. A shape leaned against the fence. As she neared, she smelled sour whiskey. Clavon, the trapper from the next ridge, pushed himself upright. His hat sat crooked and a bottle hung from his hand. He said he remembered when they sold her. Said he had wondered where a girl like that would land. His words came out slow and mean. Kate told him it was late and he needed to go home. He staggered closer instead. He said that after all the talk, a man deserved at least a smile. When she stepped back, he grabbed her wrist. His grip was rough. Fear shot through her chest. She tried to twist free, but his fingers dug in. The barn door slammed open. B came out in long strides, jaw set. His fist met Clay's jaw in a hard punch. The man dropped into the dust and stayed there. Bo stood over him for a breath, then turned his back on him and faced Kate. He asked if she was hurt. She nodded, breath shaking. Tears burned in her eyes, not only from fear, but from the shock of someone stepping between her and harm. Bo pulled the red cloth from his neck and wrapped it around her wrist, covering the marks of Clay's hand. His big fingers moved slow and careful. He said that no one laid hands on her. Inside, Kate boiled water and cleaned the blood from his knuckles. She told him he did not have to do that. He said the man had earned the hit, and that he could live with sore bones easier than he could live with knowing she had faced that alone. She pressed the cloth a little harder and admitted she was crying, but not because Clay scared her. She said she was crying because no one had ever stood in front of her like that. Something eased in Bose's face. Days later, a cold, bright morning broke over the ranch. Kate was in the kitchen kneading biscuit dough when a high scream ripped through the house. She dropped the bowl and ran outside. Gideon lay near the woodpile, his leg twisted under him, the axe fallen beside him. Its blades, reached him a heartbeat later, scooped him up, and carried him inside. On the kitchen table, the gash along Gideon's thigh gaped wide and bleeding. Kate grabbed clean cloth and water. Her hands shook, but she pressed hard on the wound, talking to him the whole time, telling him she was there, that he had to hold on, that she would not let him go. Blood soaked the cloth, but under her steady pressure the flow began to slow. Gideon's fingers dug into the edge of the table. His breathing came in sharp gasps. He looked up at her and told her not to cry. He said that she made the best biscuits and that he needed her to stay and bake more. The name he used for her was Mama. The word broke something open inside her. Tears slid down her face, but her hands did not falter. When the bandage was tight and Bee had tied it off, Gideon sagged back, pale but safe. The other children crowded close. Mira brought a blanket. Levi set a small carved horse by Gideon's hand. Samson pressed himself against Kate's side and would not move. Judah watched her with serious eyes and asked if she was staying. Kate could not trust her voice, so she just nodded. For the first time in her life, staying did not feel like being trapped. It felt like a promise she chose. Summer locked its fist around the ranch. For weeks, the sky stayed white and empty. The crete behind the barn shrank to a thin brown streak. The ground split in long, tired cracks. Corn leaves curled, beans dried, chickens scratched at dust. At supper, the children bowed their heads over thin portions and did not complain. Bo rode out at dawn and came back after dark, shoulders bent, saying little. Kate met that silence every morning in the garden. The soil was hard as stone. She wrapped cloth around her hands, lifted the hoe, and broke it a little at a time. She carried water from the deep well in heavy buckets and poured slow around each struggling plant. Her back ache and blisters swelled, but she kept going, whispering that something had to live here because this place was theirs now. One red evening, the children waited on the steps, eyes fixed on the road. Bee was not home. She left Judah in charge and walked past the fence line into the open, hot wind. Near the far post, she found Bee on one knee in the dust. Head bowed, breath harsh. His skin burned under her hand. With Judah's help, she got him into the house and onto the bed. Fever took him fast. All night she stayed beside him. She cooled cloths and water and laid them on his brow. She lifted his head for sips from a spoon. His words slid out in restless pieces. He called for the wife he had lost, for babies who were crying in his memory, but already grown. Once near midnight, he turned his face toward her and spoke clear. He begged her not to leave him, not her too. She bent close and told him she was not going anywhere, not while he needed her, not while 5 children still called this house home. She said, "This land and this life belong to them together now, sail or no sail." By gray morning, his breathing eased. Sweat cooled on his skin. The fever broke and left him wrung out, but alive. He woke to find her still in the chair, hair tangled, hands cracked and raw. He rasped that she looked awful. She told him he did too. Their small, tired smiles carried more weight than any promise. A few days later, Samson burst in from the yard, shouting for her to come. In the middle of the dry vines hung a single red tomato. It was small and scarred by sun, but bright and solid against all that brown. Bo came to stand beside her. He asked how anything had grown in a season like this. Kate brushed the vine with gentle fingers. She said sometimes things lived because someone refused to stop caring for them. Her hands were wrapped in old cloth in the same red kerchief he had once tied at her wrist. Bo took those hands and lifted them to his lips. Then he looked into her face and finally stopped holding his feelings back. He kissed her. There was no speech, no vows, only wind in the grass and a garden that had chosen to live. She kissed him back without fear. That night they sliced the tomato into 6 thin pieces, one for each child, and one for the 2 of them to share. The taste was sharp and sweet, and tasted like the future. The next spring, 2 strangers arrived in a clean wagon. Their boots shone. Their shirts were stiff. They spread a map on the kitchen table and talked about a rail line that could run straight through the ridge where the house and garden stood. They spoke of money, chances, and better lives somewhere else. Bee listened from the doorway. Kate stood by the stove with flour on her fingers. Outside, the swing she had hung from Mira moved in the breeze. The garden rose waited for seed. The house smelled of coffee and bread. The men said all of it could be traded for a bigger house in town and easy years. Bo shook his head. He said this land held his first wife's grave, his children's healing, and the woman who had planted hope into hard ground and made it grow. He told them he was not selling. They left the ridge in a cloud of dust. That evening, he and Kate carried a plank to the fence by the road. He held it while she drove nails into the post. Then she burned 3 words into the wood with a hot iron. Not for sale. By week's end, Dustben knew. Some called him a fool, some called him a man with sense. Kate cared only that when they walked past the fence, Bose's hand always reached for hers. Years turned over like pages. The children grew, left, and sometimes came back with families of their own. Little boots and bare feet thumped across the same porch boards. Kate's garden spread wider each season. Corn stood beside sunflowers. Mint tangled with onions. Beans climbed the porch rail. Wherever the dirt cracked, something green still found a way through. When Kate's last day came, they laid her under the old oak at the edge of the garden. The faded swing creaked above her. Children and grandchildren stood in a wide ring. The air smelled of turned earth and crushed mint. Bo carved her stone himself. It told anyone who paused that here grew everything she was never given, and all that she gave anyway. After that, he carried his coffee to her grave every morning. Some days he talked. Some days he only watched the rose move with the wind. When his own strength was gone, they buried him beside her under the same tree. The railroad finally bent its line around the ridge instead of cutting through it. The house settled low and sturdy into the hill. The garden went on. Even in hard years, something always pushed up through the soil. Wild mustard in the fence line, beans on old railings, sunflowers taller than the porch. Travelers passed and slowed at the fence. They read the old plank with its stubborn message and rode on, not knowing the full story, but feeling that someone here had chosen to stay. Because sometimes, even in a dry and unforgiving place, love takes root in 2 tired hearts and makes the desert bloom for people who choose each other when no one else didn't.